The lights of the 19th century ballroom are always bright. The silk dresses are always smooth. The manners are always perfect. We are told stories of a grand, romantic past. We see the tall white columns of the southern mansions. We hear the soft rustle of embroidered lace. But look closer. Look down at the floorboards. Look at the ledger sitting on the mahogany desk. Every single thread of that silk was paid for in advance. Every polished silver spoon had a price that was never written in the standard history books. The wealth of a growing nation did not come from thin air. It did not come from simple hard work. It came from a calculated design. It came from the management of human flesh. This is the story of the quietest economy in history. This is the story of how an entire society turned the human womb into a financial engine. The year is 1808. The United States passes a new law. On paper, it looks like progress. The transatlantic slave trade is officially banned. No more slave ships can cross the Atlantic Ocean. No more human cargo can be legally brought into American ports from the coast of Africa. The politicians celebrate. The northern newspapers praise the decision. The nation wants to look civilized. It wants to look clean. But the fields of the South are growing. The demand for cotton is exploding. The textile mills in England are hungry. They want more raw material. They want it faster. They want it cheaper. To get cotton, you need land. The government is already taking that land from the native tribes. But to work that land, you need hands. You need bodies. The ban on the African slave trade creates a problem. The supply of labor is cut off. But the demand is higher than ever. When a regular market loses its supply, the prices go up. The planters look at their fields. They look at their ledgers. They realize they have a shortage of capital. A prime field hand becomes a rare commodity. The price goes from $300 to $500. Then to $800. Then past $1,000. The plantation owners are practical men. They do not panic. They look for a domestic solution. If they cannot import the product, they must manufacture it. They must grow it at home. The human body becomes the new factory. The transition is quiet. It does not happen with a loud announcement. It happens in the probate courts. It happens in the private journals of wealthy planters. They stop looking at enslaved people as just workers who pick cotton in the sun. They start looking at them as self-replicating assets. An enslaved woman is no longer just a hand for the field. She is a bank. Her value is no longer measured only by how many pounds of cotton she can harvest in a single day. It is measured by her capacity to produce more assets. The calculus is simple. If a planter buys a piece of machinery, it wears down. It breaks. It loses value over time. But if a planter owns an asset that can breed, the investment multiplies itself. The profit margin becomes infinite. The legal system adapts instantly. The law states that the child follows the condition of the mother. If the mother is property, the child is property. The father does not matter. The law does not care about the father. The law only looks at the womb. The womb is the legal laboratory where private property is created out of nothing. The elite of the American South build their entire future on this single legal pivot. They create a domestic market that does not need Africa. They create a system where wealth reproduces itself in the dark cabins behind the big house. The plantation becomes a biological machine. The outside world sees only the cotton. They see the white ships sailing north. They see the money flowing into the banks of New York and Boston. They do not see the pivot. They do not see the moment the American economic machine stopped being just a system of forced labor and became a system of forced production. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The white dress of the heiress is perfectly clean. It is made of the finest muslin, imported from the north, spun from the cotton grown in her father's fields. She sits in the parlor, playing the pianoforte. Her hands are soft. She has never worked a day in her life. She does not have to. Her future has already been secured by a mathematical certainty. Outside, in the quarters, a young enslaved woman named Sarah is returning from the fields. Sarah is 19 years old. She is exhausted. Her feet are bare, cracked by the dry soil. But her body is being watched by eyes that do not see her fatigue. They see only her age. They see her shape. To the planter, Sarah is not a person. She is an investment that has reached maturity. The strategy of the plantation breeding system was elegant in its coldness. It was run by men who studied agriculture and finance with equal devotion. They wrote articles in Southern agricultural journals about the proper management of human stock. They compared the breeding of enslaved people to the breeding of cattle, horses, and sheep. The vocabulary was identical. A planter did not look at the emotional connection between a man and a woman. He looked at physical traits. He looked at height. He looked at strength. He looked at the history of a woman's family. Did her mother have many children? Were those children strong? Did they survive the first year of life? If the answer was yes, that woman was classified as a good breeder. Her price in the ledger went up immediately. The system destroyed the concept of the family with absolute calculation. The planter selected the pairings. A large, muscular man was chosen to father children with a strong, healthy woman. It did not matter if they liked each other. It did not matter if they were already married to people on other plantations. The planter's word was the law. The pairing was a business transaction designed to produce a specific product, a strong, durable worker who could withstand the heat of the lower south. To maximize the yield, the planters offered small incentives. A woman who produced a child every 2 years was given a new dress. She was given an extra ration of pork or molasses. She was given a temporary relief from the heaviest labor in the fields. In some cases, the planter promised a woman her freedom after she produced 10 or 12 children. It was a cheap promise. By the time she produced 12 children, her health was broken. Her body was spent. And the 12 children she had brought into the world were already worth thousands of dollars to the estate. The planter could afford to let her go. She had already paid for her existence 10 times over. But if a woman failed to produce children, the incentives disappeared. She was viewed as a broken machine. She was a bad investment. The planter would subject her to harsher work, or he would put her on the auction block to get rid of the dead weight. The children born from these forced pairings were monitored from the moment they opened their eyes. They were not children, they were increases in capital. In the plantation ledger, under the list of assets, the planter would write down the name of the newborn child next to a dollar figure. A baby was worth $50 on the day it was born. By the age of 5, as it learned to carry water to the field hands, its value rose to $200. By the age of 12, it was a prime commodity, ready to pick cotton or be sold to a trader from the West. The entire domestic slave trade relied on this constant supply of newborns. The old lands of Virginia and Maryland were running out of soil. The tobacco fields were dying. But the planters there did not go bankrupt. They saved themselves by becoming the primary exporters of human beings to the new, booming cotton states of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. Virginia became a human nursery. Its most profitable crop was no longer a leaf dried in a barn. Its most profitable crop was the child torn from its mother's arms. The wealth generated by this biological production was immense. It was the oil that kept the wheels of Southern society turning. It allowed the planter to buy his books, his wine, his European carriages. It allowed him to send his sons to university and his daughters to finishing schools. The innocence of the white children inside the mansion was purchased by the stolen childhood of the black children in the cabins outside. The ledger is an objective document. It does not contain feelings. It does not use exclamation points. It uses ink, numbers, and straight lines. In the archives of the historical societies, you can still find these books. The paper is yellowed now, thick and brittle. The handwriting is often beautiful, written in the elegant cursive script of the 19th century. If you open one of these books from a cotton plantation in the year 1850, you will see how the system organized its reality. On the left side of the page, the accountant writes down the operating costs. The price of mules. The cost of new iron hose. The price of bagging materials for the cotton bales. On the right side, he records the production. And there, tucked between the rows of figures, you find the names. Boy Jim, aged 8. Valued at $400. Girl Mary, aged 6. Valued at $300. Woman Betsy, aged 24, and infant at breast. Valued at $1,200. The infant does not get a name in the ledger. It does not need one yet. It only needs a value. This was the accounting of human flesh. The men who wrote these figures were not outlaws. They were the magistrates, the church wardens, the governors, and the respectable citizens of their communities. They looked at a pregnant woman and saw a compound interest statement. To understand how deep this logic went, you have to look at how the financial sector of the United States embraced the plantation ledger. The human womb did not just fund the local planter, it provided the collateral for the entire international banking system. A planter who wanted to buy more land in Mississippi did not wait until he saved enough money from his cotton harvest. He went to a bank. He went to financial agents in New Orleans or New York. He asked for a loan. The bank required security for the loan. The planter did not offer his mansion. The mansion could burn down. He did not just offer his land. The land could lose its fertility. He offered his human capital. He mortgaged his enslaved workers. The banks accepted these mortgages with standard legal paperwork. If the planter failed to pay his debt, the bank would take possession of the human property. Famous financial institutions, some of which still exist today under different corporate names, held the titles to thousands of human bodies as security for their investments. The value of these bodies was constantly adjusted based on their reproductive potential. A young woman was the best security a bank could ask for. If the loan lasted for 10 years, the security would naturally increase in volume. The woman would have children, and those children would automatically become part of the bank's collateral. The investment grew by itself, inside the dark cabins of the slave quarters. This financialization turned the brutality of breeding into a clean, abstract transaction. A banker in New York did not have to watch a mother being separated from her child. He did not have to see the whip. He sat in a wood-paneled office on Wall Street, looked at a mortgage document, and approved a line of credit based on the expected birth rates of a plantation 3,000 miles away. The Cotton Kingdom was connected to the global economy by these thin sheets of paper. The capital extracted from the forced reproduction of enslaved women flowed through the banks, into the shipping lines, and into the stock markets. It became the foundation of American credit. When the price of cotton rose, the value of the human machines rose with it. The entire society became obsessed with the preservation of this specific asset class. The laws were tightened. The courts became more rigid. The police power of the state was organized around one central mission: to protect the property rights of the owner over the jism of the worker. The ledger was the ultimate weapon of this system. It stripped the human being of everything: name, family, dignity, and future, and left only a number. It turned a historical crime into a standard business practice. The year is 1861. The talk of compromise is over. The fine manners of the politicians have collapsed into the roar of cannons. For generations, the history textbooks have described the American Civil War as a grand, philosophical dispute. They call it a conflict over constitutional interpretation. They call it a debate about states' rights and the limits of federal power. They use grand, academic language to soften the edges of the slaughter. But the men who pulled the triggers and funded the armies knew exactly what they were fighting for. They did not speak in abstract theories when they sat in their private rooms. They spoke in the language of the market. The Civil War was a war fought to protect a $3 billion asset class. To understand the desperation of the Southern elite, you must look at the math. In 1860, the 4 million human beings held in bondage across the American South were worth more than all the gold and silver in circulation. They were worth more than every mile of railroad track, every locomotive, every textile mill, and every bank deposit in the entire nation combined. The bodies of the enslaved were the bedrock of the country's wealth. The Southern aristocracy was not just wealthy, they were the richest men in the Western Hemisphere. And their entire economic empire depended on one thing: expansion. The breeding system had become too efficient. The population of enslaved people was growing rapidly. If the plantation system was confined to the existing southern states, the market would become saturated. The price of human labor would plateau. Then, it would begin to drop. The portfolios of the great planters would depreciate. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was a direct threat to the ledger. Lincoln did not promise to destroy slavery where it already existed. He promised to stop its expansion into the new territories of the West. For the Southern elite, this was a death sentence for their capital. If they could not take their human property into Kansas, into Nebraska, into Texas, and beyond, their biological factories would fail. The wealth generated by the womb would choke on its own supply. They chose to tear the nation apart rather than watch their assets lose value. The secession of the Southern states was not a romantic defense of a traditional way of life. It was a cold, calculated asset protection strategy. It was a preemptive strike by a corporate elite to defend the single largest financial asset class in the American economy. The war was brutal. It lasted for 4 long years. It turned the fields of the South into graveyards. More than 600,000 men died in the mud. And then, the North won. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified. With a single stroke of a pen, the institution of chattel slavery was legally dead. 4 million people walked away from the cotton fields, away from the breeding pens, and into the light of freedom. From a purely financial perspective, this was the largest uncompensated liquidation of private property in human history. $3 billion in collateral vanished overnight. The Southern banks failed. The great plantation mansions began to rot. The old elite found themselves standing on vast tracts of empty land, their wealth completely erased. But the capital that had been extracted from those bodies over the previous 60 years did not disappear. It had already moved. The profits from the millions of cotton bales picked by enslaved hands had not stayed on the plantations. They had been deposited long ago in the financial centers of the North. They were sitting in the vaults of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. That blood-stained money had already been put to work. It had built the northern railroads. It had funded the factories of the Industrial Revolution. It had provided the massive endowments for universities that still bear the names of America's elite. The South was left in ruins, but the architecture of modern American wealth had already been built. The ledger had simply shifted its weight. The plantation house is gone. The white columns have crumbled into the dust. The war is over, and the planters are looking at their empty fields. They have no more slaves. The law has taken away their property. But these men are pragmatists. They do not give up. They open the text of the new Constitution, and they read the words of the 13th Amendment. They read past the celebration of freedom. They look for the fine print. And there, in the middle of the sentence that's supposed to end human bondage, they find their loophole. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Those 8 words, except as a punishment for crime, become the foundation for a new system of human extraction. The Southern states do not waste time. They do not wait for the dust of the war to settle. They begin to rewrite their criminal codes with absolute speed. They pass a wave of new laws that history will call the Black Codes and the Pig Laws. These are not regular laws designed to keep the peace. They are economic traps designed to criminalize the everyday behavior of a specific population. Under these new statutes, it becomes a crime for a black man to be unemployed. If he is walking down a road without a written contract of labor from a white employer, he is arrested for vagrancy. If he speaks too loudly in public, he is arrested for disturbing the peace. If he changes his job without permission, he is arrested for breach of contract. The justice system becomes a net. It catches human bodies by the thousands. The local magistrates hand out enormous fines for these petty infractions. A man who cannot pay a $50 fine for standing on a street corner is not let go. He is sentenced to months or years of hard labor in the custody of the state. The prisons fill up to the point of bursting within a matter of months. The Southern states are broke. They have no money to build new cells. They have no budget to feed the prisoners. So they invent a savage, innovative solution to their financial problem. They invent the convict lease system. The state turns its prisoners into a rental commodity. A railroad contractor in Tennessee, a lumber company in Florida, or a coal mining company in Alabama can now go to the state warden and sign a lease. They pay the state a few dollars a month for every prisoner delivered to their work camps. The state gets a massive new stream of revenue without spending a dime on infrastructure. The private corporation gets a captive, desperate workforce that cannot strike, cannot quit, and cannot demand wages. The convict lease system is, by every measurable standard, more lethal than chattel slavery ever was. Under the old antebellum system, an enslaved person was an expensive, long-term capital asset. If a planter paid $1,500 for a worker at an auction, he had a cold, financial interest in keeping that person alive long enough to make back the investment. It was an incentive born of greed, but it was an incentive nonetheless. But under the convict lease system, the corporation does not own the man. They only rent him. The prisoner represents zero capital investment for the company. He is completely disposable. If a leased prisoner dies from dysentery in a swamp, or if his bones are crushed in a coal mine collapse, the corporation suffers no financial loss. They do not lose an asset. They simply write a letter or send a telegram to the state prison authority, asking for another body to be shipped out on the next morning train. The mortality rates in these convict camps become apocalyptic. In some camps across the South, the annual death rate goes past 20%. 1 out of every 5 men dies within 12 months. They are forced to work from before dawn until after dark. If they do not meet their daily extraction quotas of coal or lumber, they are tied to wooden posts and whipped until their skin splits open. When they die, their bodies are buried in shallow, unmarked trenches in the pine woods, or burned inside the industrial coke ovens to save time. Great corporate empires are built on this pool of disposable labor. Companies like the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company use thousands of these leased prisoners to tear iron and coal out of the earth. Their labor builds the infrastructure of cities like Birmingham, Alabama. The modern industrial expansion of the New South is financed by the marrow of men whose only crime was walking down a dirt path without a master's note in their pocket. Mississippi decides to take a different path. The state does not want to share its profits with private mining corporations or railroad contractors. The state government wants to run the engine itself. In the fertile mud of the Delta region, the state purchases an enormous tract of land. They clear the trees. They build a wooden fence. They name it Parchman Farm. Officially, Parchman Farm is designated as a state penitentiary. But if you walk onto the property in the late 19th or early 20th century, the language of the law fades away. Your eyes see the reality. It is a massive, fully functioning antebellum cotton plantation. The prisoners are overwhelmingly young black men, swept up by the vagrancy laws. They do not wear civilian clothes, they wear uniforms of heavy stripes. They do not work for wages, they work under the shadow of shotguns held by mounted guards known as drivers. From the first crack of dawn until the sun drops behind the trees, they bend their backs over the cotton rows. The state extracts millions of dollars in pure profit from the cotton shipped out of Parchman Farm. That money goes directly into the state treasury. It funds the salaries of the politicians, the building of state roads, and the maintenance of the very legal apparatus that keeps the prison full. The loop is perfect. The crime pays for the state, and the state creates the crime. In Louisiana, the architecture is even more direct. The state takes over a vast property along the Mississippi River. Before the war, this land was a famous slave breeding plantation. It was named Angola, after the African country where many of its original workers had been stolen. The state keeps the land. They keep the old slave cabins. They keep the same fields of sugarcane and cotton. They simply convert the breeding farm into the Louisiana State Penitentiary. The physical location of the horror does not change. The sun is the same. The heat is the same. The brutal pace of the labor is identical. The men working the soil simply trade the title of slave for the title of inmate. The iron chains that used to connect them to a private master are replaced by the iron bars of a cell block owned by the government. Angola remains operational. It stands as the largest maximum security prison in the United States. It still sits on that exact same plantation land. The descendants of the men who picked cotton under the whip are still out in those fields today, picking crops under the watchful eyes of guards on horseback. The history of American wealth is not a collection of separate chapters. It is one continuous, unblinking ledger line. The system never broke, it was optimized. When chattel slavery became illegal, the market adapted to use the convict lease camp. When the convict lease camp became too scandalous for the public, the system evolved into the modern prison industrial complex. The underlying math never changed. The objective has always been the same: minimize the input cost of labor, maximize the projected yield of capital, and find a legal framework to justify the extraction. The men who designed these systems were not monsters in their own minds. They did not wake up wanting to cause pain. They were respectable men. They were efficiency experts. They were accountants, lawyers, and investment managers. They looked at a human life and saw nothing but an expense line that needed to be managed down to zero. If you want to understand the modern economy, you cannot just look at the glass skyscrapers, the polished corporate logos, or the clean digital screens of the stock market. You have to look at the foundation. You have to look beneath the concrete of the cities. You have to look at the soil. The American economic engine was not built by the gentle, neutral forces of a free market. It was carved out of human flesh. It was directed by the heavy, blood-darkened hand of the overseer, and it was calculated down to the last penny by the precise, unblinking pen of the accountant. The ledger was never destroyed in 1865. The lines were just redrawn. The figures were just moved to a new page. The accounting of human bodies continues. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.